So you're very welcome, Minister.
Thanks, Tom. Good to see a full room of builders and developers. My job is to put you all to work building houses. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm heartened to see this afternoon's session is centred around the theme of building sustainable communities, because that's ultimately my job from a policy and funding perspective. In essence, that's what the government strategy is all about. Rebuilding Ireland is about a lot more than bricks and mortar. It's about putting sustainable communities in place right across the country. The plan commits the government to a range of measures to increase the supply of all forms of housing. That means social housing, more rental properties, and of course, homes to buy. In terms of supply, this country really hit rock bottom, and people in this room don't need me to tell them that because they were directly affected by it. While we have a long way to go, I do sense some optimism and an improving sector, despite some of the ongoing barriers to supply. Rebuilding Ireland provides for a holistic approach to facilitating home building at scale through interlinked actions in key areas that were identified by stakeholders. Despite the fact that we put it together in about 74 days, there was a lot of consultation in the build-up to actually signing off and agreeing the funding package and indeed the policy initiatives, such as infrastructure, planning and land use, and addressing skills deficits in your sector. While tackling structural constraints, it's important, the objective of Rebuilding Ireland is to invest in housing and the infrastructure badly needed to get it started. For social housing provision, I've agreed €5.35 billion with government in exchequer investment to deliver about 47,000 social housing units over the period 2016 to 2021. Just to put that into context, that means we're going to increase the social housing stock in Ireland by over 30% in 5 years, largely by new build, but also by acquisition and long-term lease. You'll be involved in all of that because local authorities will be in partnership with many of your companies to make it happen. And just in case anybody thinks we're getting carried away in terms of providing or preparing to provide for too much social housing in Ireland, social housing makes up between 7 and 8% of the overall housing stock in Ireland. The average across the European Union is between 17 and 18%. So we're playing catch-up here, and I think our reliance, our over-reliance perhaps, in the private rental sector to deal with social housing challenges has been exposed badly in the last decade. In fact, I've just come from the launch of Pillar 2 under Rebuilding Ireland, accelerating social housing delivery, and there are opportunities for house builders to work with local authorities, as I say, and approved housing bodies who will also build an awful lot of the houses to build new homes right across the country. In particular, I want to mention a new scheme where developments and developers can benefit from upfront payments of Part 5 or for Part 5 units, which would normally be paid on completion. And I've spoken to many of you in relation to Part 5 in terms of your frustrations around the negotiation and inspection process, and often having the houses built and completed and sometimes occupied for some time before payments are made. We're going to turn that on its head. And not only am I going to insist on Part 5 working in the context of mixed tenure developments, but I also want to use Part 5 as a way of helping you to get the finance you need together to get projects moving. In other words, we are going to instruct local authorities to pay upfront from the plans for the Part 5 elements of the developments that you will develop. So you'll be getting 10% payments for houses that haven't even been built yet. In terms of the overall development, and I hope that that will have a big impact in terms of your ability to be able to get the finance arrangements in place to be able to finance a more ambitious approach towards building large-scale developments rather than having to do it in small phases that pay for each other as they go. We've set aside a budget of 140 million to be allocated for Part 5 acquisitions over the initial period of the scheme to the end of 2018. And essentially what I'm saying to you is there is a first come first serve basis here. People who move early will have their Part 5s paid for up front early. And people who wait for a few years probably won't. It'll probably end up going back to the old system. There are a number of potential positive outcomes to this proposal, including a substantial reduction in the funding cost, as I say, of a project and the ultimate cost to the purchaser, I hope, achieving more positive engagement with Part 5, along with the potential to stimulate construction activity. The study undertaken by the Dublin Housing Supply Task Force and similar studies around the country identified infrastructure deficits that were impeding housing delivery on significant sites. In order to quickly get these sites moving, Rebuilding Ireland puts in place a €200 million local infrastructure activation fund. House builders will have seen the circular on this, and I urge you to get involved with your local authority to submit bids for funding. Don't forget the closing date is actually the 14th of October, next week. Separately, the NTMA and CIF will also prepare an offer for developers to facilitate on-site infrastructure costs. Both actions serve to reduce costs, meaning housing at more affordable prices should be available where it's generally needed. And can I say on the LifeHAF element of it, this is a competitive process. All right? There is not enough money for every project that is looking for infrastructure to open up sites. And so we will be making decisions before the end of the year on the basis of the sites that can deliver the most the most houses, either private or social, on sites where they're most badly needed and where we can get them done as quickly as possible. And that will be effectively the sole criteria for determining where the money goes. We've also committed to reducing the cost of building housing by taking some of the time and risk out of the planning process. There's been a lot of focus actually in the build-up to the budget, and I'll talk a little bit about first-time buyers in a few minutes. But the criticism of what people perceive will be announced next week has been that, look, this is going to drive up prices and it's not going to do anything for supply. It's all about supporting demand. Nothing could be further from the truth, actually. We are doing what we can with the levers that we have available to us to try and reduce the cost of building a house or building a development of houses. And that is actually, we're putting a lot more money into that, actually, than we will be into the first-time buyer scheme, which I'll talk to you about in a few minutes. But on the planning side, housing development proposals of over 100 units will in the future go straight to Bord Pleanála for priority decision. And they'll get a decision from Bord Pleanála within a 16-week statutory process. Can I say that this will have a 3-year sunset clause. So again, it's about me saying to you, if you want effectively the new system, which is a preferable process to the previous one, well then get on with it. Because we will probably revert back to something similar to the previous system in 3 or 4 years' time. And just in case anybody, and some people have said to me, look, planning isn't the issue here. So we were building at our height nearly 90,000 units and there was no problem with planning then. Well, let me just give you the facts of the situation. There are 15 projects that are being finalised or have been finalised this year in terms of decision by Bord Pleanála for developments of over 100 units, which says a lot in itself in terms of lack of activity. And the average length of time that it's taken those projects to get a decision has been 78 weeks. 78 weeks. That's a year and a half. What we are proposing to do is to have a statutory 9-week pre-planning process and a statutory 16-week consideration process by Bord Pleanála to make a decision. That's 25 weeks. And so we're talking about a dramatic change in terms of the certainty and timelines around getting planning decisions for large developments, while at the same time maintaining and supporting the integrity of the decision-making process. And we have legislation before Cabinet at the moment, which has been passed in principle by Cabinet and will be brought through the various stages in the Oireachtas in the coming weeks. But I think it's important to nail this myth that actually the length of time that it takes to get a decision on planning is a non-issue. It is an issue, and we are going to address it, but it is one of many solutions that are going to contribute to an overall improved housing market for many of you to build the projects that you want to get on with. We're facing into the next period in a far better position than we collectively were a few short years ago. The Irish economy is growing, unemployment is falling, and we need to prepare for a growing population undoubtedly. The improvements in the labour market are also expected to continue with the unemployment rate forecast to fall, an annual average of 8.3% in 2016 and the annual average of 7.3% in 2017, we hope and expect. Evidence of this is seen in the construction industry, with employment increasing over the past few quarters, and nearly 137,000 were employed in the construction industry in Q2 in 2016. And my understanding, although I'd stand corrected, is that over the last 12 months we've seen about an extra 10,000 people working in the construction industry in Ireland, and continuing to accelerate, mainly driven by commercial developments and office complexes and so on, but also now increasingly building houses too. Nevertheless, the future is not without its challenges, and we need to be ready. A sustainable level of housing is a key output required to maintain a stable and functioning economy. While the signs are positive, we can't let housing become a negative or an impediment to future growth, and it is exactly that right now. The Irish government is also doing everything it can to prepare for a future without the UK in the EU, while continuing our plan to protect our economy, create jobs, and make people's lives better. A big stepping stone in that plan will be the budget in 6 days' time. Next week's budget will reflect our key priorities, including to fund new initiatives on housing, to provide homes for our people, and to use the fruits of a growing economy to invest in vital public services, and to ease the pressure on hard-pressed working families. And I'm sure Paschal Donoghue gave you a flavour of the kind of thinking that's in government at the moment. 2016 is also shaping up to be another improved year of growth for the construction industry. I believe that there is more than 15.6 billion worth of projects in the pipeline currently. In 2016, the construction sector is expected to grow by more than 20%. However, on the downside, house building in the country is still one of the most fraught sectors in our fast-growing economy. The annual requirement for new homes is around 25,000, but the industry output is currently well below that level. My view, actually, as most of you will know, is that what we need is about 35,000 for a sustained period to make up for the deficit of the last 7 or 8 years. Just over 12,600 housing units were completed last year. Almost half of them were individual one-off houses. And of the other half, a significant portion of it was actually finishing out unfinished houses or unfinished apartment complexes. And so when you start to narrow the numbers down, in terms of new build, you're probably talking about 3,000 or 4,000 houses in the whole country, outside of one-off houses in the countryside, which is not solving our problem. So that is the level of stagnation that has actually gripped this sector, and understandably so, given what you've been through. So let's not beat around the bush. Ireland is in the grip of a chronic housing shortage, and we need to change that. With Rebuilding Ireland, we've put in place the necessary mechanism to increase housing output over time. In formulating a plan, we listened to you and other stakeholders and acted on what you told us needed to happen. A significant amount of analysis was undertaken on the housing market, and the plan addresses 3 key elements: land, costs, and realisable demand. In terms of land, results of the national survey of all land zoned for residential development in statutory local authority development plans and local area plans across Ireland indicated that there was 17,434 hectares of residential zoned lands nationally, enough for the construction of over 414,000 dwellings. So zoned land is not an issue when it comes to the delivery of housing. There is plenty of zoned land to meet growing demand. But if there isn't zoned land, in areas where there is specific demand, and because of whatever reason, whether it's political or something else, that there hasn't been zoned land in areas that should be zoned for land. Well, I have written directly to chief executives, and I have asked them not to wait for the next development plan process, but to actually change that through variation, if they need to actually ensure that there is sufficient zoned land for the sector to move ahead and to increase output when and where appropriate. Through Rebuilding Ireland, we are going to champion the best use of state lands for housing. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of land banks in the state, particularly around this city actually. And we want to strategically use those land banks in a way that maybe we haven't before. We want to take on the political arguments that say we should only be using state-owned housing land for state-owned housing. That makes no sense to me in the context of the mixed tenure ambitions that we have. And that's why I am pleased to say, on big, high-profile, controversial sites like O'Devany Gardens, for example, we now have an agreement with other political parties, by and large, including parties that don't see eye to eye with me and with Fine Gael on most things, that actually on that site we're going to have 50% private, 20% affordable rental, and 30% social housing. On a site that was solely social housing in the past. So that we can actually create different types of communities with a lot more diversity and a lot more opportunity in an effort to combat the social disadvantage that the kind of segregation that housing policy in the past has caused, has resulted in. We also need a more strategic view for the longer term, and this will be considered under the new National Planning Framework. The National Planning Framework will essentially replace the National Spatial Strategy. It'll be in place and agreed, I hope, by the middle of next year. And effectively, it's planning sort of 20 to 25 years out. So we are essentially trying to envisage and design what Ireland should look like by 2040. And then the difficult task is, well, how do we get there? How do we accommodate an extra 1 million people living in Ireland? Where will they live? How will they move around? Where will they work? And we certainly cannot afford a situation where they simply all come to Dublin and the Greater Dublin area, because that's what's happened in the last 20 years when an extra 1 million people were added to the Irish population. And that is the total failure of the National Spatial Strategy that was put in place in 2002. So there'll be another forum and more opportunities to discuss the National Planning Framework, but it will be about rebalancing Dublin, increasing the population of the capital city, of course, but also having a pretty proactive and targeted cities policy for other parts of Ireland too, to try and create more balanced regional growth and development and population growth. Under Rebuilding Ireland, we are targeting sites with the capacity to deliver housing on large scale. I will shortly be in a position to name key sites which we want to become pathfinder projects. These projects will be in the spotlight to show that we can to show what we can achieve in terms of accelerating housing delivery, integrating communities, and demonstrating new thinking in the area of design and ambition. An initial estimation of potential pathfinder sites indicates that they are capable of delivering in the range of 15 to 20,000 new homes. The focus will be on creating attractive places to live at affordable prices and rents. Private, rental and social housing will be designed and built together. The challenge here for local authorities, landowners and developers is to innovate and to deliver quality product at affordable prices and at scale. While I can't give away secrets in terms of next week's budget, first-time buyers in this country face a daunting prospect in terms of securing a mortgage and saving for a deposit. We're going to do something about that next week, and it won't be perfect. It's not going to solve everybody's problem, but I think it will help. There will be a Help to Buy scheme for first-time buyers, and this will also encourage extra supply of new homes by increasing realisable demand. And that is the whole point here. Because there's an academic discussion going on about whether or not you should help first-time buyers in terms of their capacity to raise a mortgage and raise a deposit and to buy a house. and that by doing it, we're somehow going to drive up the price of new houses. The problem is that is an academic discussion because there are not new houses for first-time buyers being built at the moment. And so until that starts, we're not going to have a practical discussion. So the reality is that there are some limited housing units being built for first-time buyers, but they are very limited. And in the last year, in terms of the buying market, only 25% of people who bought homes in Ireland were first-time buyers. That figure should be closer to 60%, as you know, because you build them the houses. And so most of you are making business decisions not to target the first time, but there are some exceptions to that, but most of you are making business decisions that when you build houses, you're targeting a different type of market, a higher value market, where you can get margin, where people will pay cash to buy houses. Half of all the houses in Ireland in the last 12 months were bought with cash, not with a mortgage. And so we need to change and reorientate the market back to some kind of normality. And until first-time buyers have a chance to get back into the market in terms of the ability to be able to raise a deposit while at the same time paying rent in a private rental market and to be able to get a mortgage together, well then I think we will continue to talk in the absence of reality about the impact that will have on house prices. And so what I'm interested in is pragmatic solutions where houses get built and people can afford to buy them. And we are doing a lot of things to drive down the cost of building those houses, but we also need to address the first-time buyer's capacity to be able to buy a house at a reasonable price. And that capacity, even though the demand is strong, the ability to act on that demand isn't there because they can't put the finances together. And so that is what I mean when I say the initiative that we take next week is a supply driver, because it will, I hope, change the mindset of many people in this room to the prospect of building houses for first-time buyers, knowing that more of them will be able to actually buy the product that you're going to build for them. And that is what this is about, driving new houses, new supply, and getting back to some kind of normal ratio between houses being built for first-time buyers versus other segments of the market. We know that the poor infrastructure, by the way, you just have to wait for next week on the figures. So you can ask me if you want, but I'm not going to tell you. I think Michael Noonan is irritated enough with me at the moment that I've been speaking about this so much without giving away any more. But we will go as far as we think we can within reason to support first-time buyers. And I think that package, most importantly, will result in a lot more houses being built for them. We know that poor infrastructure could thwart our progress when it comes to delivering housing and jobs. Hence the importance of infrastructural investment recognised in the current programme for government. This is reflected in the inclusion of 5 billion of additional capital expenditure in the period to 2021, which is over and above the 27 billion exchequer capital investment provided for in the capital plan published last year. Importantly, according to your own stats, every 1 billion invested in infrastructure generates about 10,000 new jobs. Major infrastructural investment projects are currently underway or are in the planning process in Dublin. For example, Grange Gorman DIT campus, the Lewis Cross City, the National Children's Hospital, and many more besides. And that's just Dublin. This government aims to achieve a dramatic change in the circumstances around the housing system as quickly as we can, to ensure that any blockages that arise are eradicated as quickly as possible. We now have a dedicated housing delivery office that's been established within my department to drive delivery of some of the key ambitious private and social housing elements of the plan. Essentially, we have a group of people who are asked to be project managers, to liaise with private developers, with chief executives and local authorities, and obviously with the team in my department. And can I say that I have a team in my department now who are focused and who are working around the clock with me to try and ensure that everything that we control within the department is working as efficiently as it possibly can to try and get throughput up. And I really have nothing but positive things to say about the team around me at the moment. The office, project delivery office or housing delivery office is staffed by project management, procurement and technical experts, and works with a full range of stakeholders to accelerate housing delivery, both private and social. And if you have a problem, a fundamental problem in terms of delivering a project, well, then you should contact them. And it's their job to try and help remove any unreasonable barriers that are there. I know from experience that it's only through a partnership approach that demanding goals can be met. As committed to in Rebuilding Ireland, I also intend to establish a specific stakeholder forum that I'll personally chair and which will act as a vehicle for continuous feedback on the practical experience of the implementation of the housing plan. Similar to the attendance at the various stakeholder events, this forum would include representation from a full range of stakeholder groups, and I hope that the CIF will be a strong contributor to that forum. So look, can I say that I'm delighted to be here. We have a plan that I am determined to implement. It's not perfect, but I think it's a good start given where this industry has been over the last 7 or 8 years. It's about social change and building communities, as well as about rebuilding a construction industry in terms of capacity, finance, land availability, and the partnership with the state that many of you, I hope, will engage in a way that can be very profitable for you and can deliver significant projects and significant numbers of housing units quickly in the areas that we need them. If you look at the budget next week and you look at the numbers in it, I think there'll be one very clear message anyway, that the housing sector is the number one priority for government. If you look at the capital envelope that's available to Paschal Donoghue, 60% of it is going to housing in terms of the extra money that he had to spend. I'm not very popular with my colleagues because of that. But that is the reality. And that is the priority that has been given to this sector at the moment. The idea that we would essentially have an agreement for the next 6 years to spend nearly €5.5 billion on a social housing build programme is also a very significant step up from where we were a year ago or 2 years ago. And again, I think sends a very strong message out. So look, help us get the job done. I think it'll be good business for you. I think it'll be responsible politics for me. And I think that the partnership between the state, both national and local, and the private construction sector and the CIF membership can be a very positive one for everybody. And most importantly, we can provide a lot of badly needed homes for many families who currently want them. So thanks very much for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister, and certainly we welcome your comments. We welcome the initiatives you've taken today. I think in terms of the refurbishment and the voids and the so-called vacant houses that the CSO showed up and so on, I think that's bread and butter work, particularly for our small members around the country, and we certainly welcome that. As the Minister said, he's available for some questions now, so we take them as quick as we can. Identify yourselves to the people with the microphones, and we won't have any delay in between.
Yeah, just while you're finding the first questioner there, just the point that Tom made, we launched a number of schemes today. The first is what's called a repair and leasing scheme, and we're going to spend about 140 million on that over the next 5 years. And essentially what that's going to do with local authorities and approved housing bodies is target private owners of vacant properties. And most of those vacant properties will need 10 or 20 or 30,000 euros spent on them to bring them up to spec to be rented. And I think that's going to be great business for a lot of the small builders all over the country who will be actually doing that work for local authorities. The other thing that we're going to spend 25 million on next year and 50 million on the year after is to allow local authorities to purchase derelict vacant properties around towns, cities and villages. And again, the work to actually upgrade those properties is ideal for an awful lot of the smaller builders around the country who might be struggling to get the finance together to build the kind of developments that I've been talking about earlier. So there's a lot of good business opportunity here. And again, this is all about partnering with local authorities to working on the projects that they're going to be financed to deliver.
Thank you. Have we got a question? Matt?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Minister, and thank you very much for your talk there. I have to say, just before I ask the question, I want to acknowledge your very, very positive moves to advance and disappear the blockages that have appeared in our whole development and building system. I also want to welcome the Part 5 pre-funding idea that you just announced. I know that you've just published a new planning bill, and shortly before that you announced a 200 million fund to remove infrastructure blocks. And I attended a meeting in your department on this issue a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that immediately struck myself and others in the room was that while this is a very welcome initiative, it does have one stumbling block, and that is it runs into public procurement straight away. If the department has to spend money, they have to go through the public procurement process, and this completely negates the speed at which you wanted to advance this thing. We had an idea. It won't work in every case, but it might work in some of the cases. And as you have a planning bill going through the Dáil, or about to go into the Dáil, I wondered if you could possibly include this. There are certain schemes, and the bigger schemes and everything else could we had an old system where we used to offset. The developer would expend money, and the local authority would offset that against their development contribution and so on. And this is a way of delivering infrastructure and the necessary to open up sites and so on in a much quicker fashion. And I might add, it will also be a heck of a lot cheaper, because anything that a private developer does is always cheaper, I'm sorry to say, but that's the facts. So I wonder if you could look at that with your officials and see what you can do. I have to say, just on a personal comment, I haven't seen, and I'm older than I look, but I haven't seen an initiative like this on housing since Ballymun in the 1960s, and Neil Blaney. I compliment you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Who was Neil Blaney?
Minister, Michael Anglam is my name. In terms of identifying bottlenecks, from our experience, the loan-to-income ratio of 3.5, it should be flexible rather than so rigid, because there are many situations where the 3.5 certainly is not a prudent way to approach a mortgage. And secondly, I would like to support Matt Gallagher very much in reference to offsets, where builders can upfront spend some money and offset it against either levies or some other aspect of the development. Thank you, Minister.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, on the infrastructure side, I mean, what we're talking about here in terms of state funding is off-site infrastructure. So it's often outside, well, it's always outside of the border of the site. So it's a bridge, or it's an extra lane in a road, or it's an extension of piping infrastructure. Sometimes it might be extra green space that needs to be provided to make a project work. It can be a whole range of things, right? But
it also can be a road within a site.
Yeah, that's a separate thing, right? But the infrastructure that we're talking about primarily is to open up sites to get them moving. The building of infrastructure within a site, I absolutely accept, is a different thing, and I think where possible we should be looking to try to get developers to provide that, because they control and manage the site anyway. There are some good examples of that. I'm not going to look at anyone in particular, but there are some very significant examples of that in Dublin at the moment, on some of the SDZs, where there's ongoing conversations around who should put road infrastructure in place to release the potential of an SDZ, where there may be multiple developers who are waiting on that, and whether or not we can get that done faster and more cost effectively by agreement between developers rather than getting a local authority to do it. And these are things that we need to tease through, but we need to do it quickly because in particular on SDZs, where we have master plans, where we already have zoning, where we know what we want them to look like, it's a question of just getting on and building them. And we need to find ways of making those decisions happen faster, which is why they are exactly the kind of relationships and discussions that we want the housing delivery unit to be involved in, to basically act as a sort of a broker stroke mediator to make the thing move on, which may give a local authority some cover actually in terms of an appetite for risk, which sometimes is needed in a big project, and also help a developer to get a message across in terms of what they're trying to do. So but I do think there is a slight difference between internal site infrastructure and external site infrastructure, which clearly we have to go through a procurement process, but we're looking to try to fast track is the wrong word, but we're looking to try and streamline the procurement process to try and make it happen faster. But there are some limitations there, and we have EU rules to comply with and all sorts of other things, which is why if we can get developers who are managing sites to do it, it does make sense.
Thank you very much. I think there's a question way back at the back. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Michael Blaney again. Is Blaney?
Sorry,
Michael Blaney, yeah. My question is really, you spoke about driving down costs, and clearly that's a huge component of any selling price for a house. I'm just wondering specifically, have you got any insight into how the government can drive down costs?
Yeah, we've essentially looked at all of the costs that are linked to the building of a house, and we're trying to look at different segments that we can have an impact on that can drive down price. So, the biggest of those for many developments, particularly in Dublin, is land costs or site costs, which could be somewhere between 50 and 80 grand a house, depending. And that's why we want to use state-owned lands much more strategically. So, this morning actually, in Charlemont Estate, the only PPP that survived through the construction recession, if you want to call it that, is now resulting in a private developer building 79 new social housing units on a 5-acre site that was purely social housing in the past, and is going to build about 150 private apartments on that site, as well as office accommodation and a whole series of other sports and leisure facilities and all the rest of it. And again, I think that's a good example of us using state lands strategically to try and reduce the site costs that developers and builders might otherwise have to endure, but at the same time getting good strategic value for the use of that publicly owned land. So it's not always monetary value that we're after in terms of state land. We may well be able to get other benefits from the strategic use of it. The other thing is what we've just talked about. If a developer has to endure the cost of building a bridge to get into their site, well then those numbers have to be added into the cost of the sales price. You look at a site like the Glass Bottle site. There's a bridge needed across the Dodder. And we may well choose, if it makes sense to do it, to pay for that through the infrastructure fund. We'll have to see what else are competing with that, but I suspect that'll be part of the applications. And again, that impacts on the margin and therefore the price of the houses in those sites. It's the same if anyone here is from Cork. The cost of developing on the Docklands in Cork, South and North Docklands, in terms of infrastructure, is significant. And if the state doesn't pay for that infrastructure, developers have to do it, and it adds significantly to the overall cost. So we've targeted infrastructure, we've targeted land, and we're also trying to streamline the planning process. I'm told that it's much more expensive to finance, in some cases impossible to finance, a project without certainty around planning decisions. And again, we're trying to take the guesswork out of that and give some guarantees in terms of timelines. And I think that will be helpful. We're also working with CIF and the NTMA, looking at putting a new fund in place for internal infrastructure costs. There'll be about a €200 million fund for that too, which will be low-cost money. So there are lots of ways in which we're looking at reducing the overall cost of building a house. What we're not going to do is simply slash VAT, which I know has been a campaign that I was actually quite convinced by at the start until we looked at it in a lot of detail. One, it's not targeted because it would apply everywhere, even where the house price isn't high at the moment. And in much of the country, house prices need to increase, not decrease, because it's not viable to build. Because second-hand houses are half the price of the cost of building a house. But also the process around reducing VAT takes time and needs negotiation, and the hassle value of it versus the benefit of it, unless you were to get rid of VAT altogether, which I'm told is impossible legally, even if we wanted to do it, without about 2 years of lobbying. So we've moved away from that idea, and instead we're focusing on first-time buyers, which I think will have a similar effect as reducing VAT rates, except targeting first-time buyers, which is the segment of the buying market that really needs the help. So I think it's about targeting resources in the most effective way that we can, and also using the other strategic levers that the state has to try and get costs down.
Just one item that came up this morning, Minister, in terms of the costs, and was raised very strongly from the floor and part of our panel discussion, the issue of waste soil, of stones and soil, of demolition waste, currently in terms of the licensing by the EPA and the different areas, like there's been a massive increase in output recently, and I know the CIF together with PJ Rutten here from RPS and some of the industry have met this week with your own senior officials, with the officials in the Department of Energy and with the EPA, and unfortunately there is a looming crisis there in terms of even that it may stall the Children's Hospital. I think is it 400 million cubes that's going to come out of there alone. It will take every grain of capacity that's in the greater Dublin area. So it's just something that politically you need to be aware of, your officials are aware of, if we've been dealing, and we're very anxious as an industry that waste soil will be dealt with in a responsible and in a legal way. But on the other hand, in terms of classification of a waste, soil and stone is not a big threat to anybody really, and at the moment it has to go into a pretty expensive licensed landfill. So just not to delay it, but it's an issue that's looming out there, and people from the floor have raised it that it is currently a very substantial cost in terms of just clearing a site for 3 or 4 houses. Yeah, no, we look at that. The EPA isn't under my department anymore. It's now under Minister Naughton's department, but I'll talk to him about it. There are sites that I can think of as well that need a lot of extra infill material and not necessarily topsoil. I'm thinking of the whole Bowling Island project. It needs huge volumes of material and will do over the next 2 years. But look, I take the point. A large ferry.
In general, the cost of clearing sites and doing it legally, which is important. We do need to make sure that that's cost effective.
Is there a final question from the floor? Well, if there isn't, Minister, I'll just make one point that I know people would want me to make in terms of the increased build that we're going to do, and double up hopefully our output in a short period, and in terms of the quality of that build and making sure that it's done legally, that it's done by compliant and good quality builders. We've talked to you before about the Construction Industry Register of Ireland. We understand it's been put on the legislative programme for the back end of this year, and we'd be very keen, it's promised in Construction 2020, we'd be very keen that that's made mandatory, and that all of the new build, whether it be social or private, is done by competent contractors that are compliant, health and safety, tax-wise, otherwise, and so on. We want to represent a compliant professional industry, and we're concerned again that the cowboys, and I don't use that word lightly, that caused lots of grief to us in terms of reputation in the past, won't be allowed to get back into business.
Yeah. No, well, I can assure you that we'll be trying to support good business and quality construction, and it's the regulations, as you know, because it makes it more expensive to build a house these days. The regulations are pretty tight. We need to ensure that we have a level playing field for everybody. which means that we have to have a proper inspection system that ensures that everybody is playing by the rules. And there's as you say, there are policy initiatives coming down the road in that area, but I'll certainly take that on board. So listen, thanks very much. Okay.
I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone, Minister. Michael Stone in his address this morning more or less said that the industry will have to step up. And I think you've used the same term. Certainly you're laying down a challenge to the industry as well. As soon as you get your budgetary issues over the line and all the other issues and the demand builds up, we need to be able to deliver. And certainly I think from the CIF's point of view, we welcome very much your dedicated housing delivery office. We welcome your idea of a stakeholder forum. We'll be very, very keen to be involved, very, very genuinely to support you in that. So thank you for coming here, and I wish you very best of luck in terms of carrying out the plan.
Great. Thank you.